Okay. Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar on accessibility, art and culture. My name is Emma Shaw, and I lead on community and impact at Tilting the Lens. I've been at Tilting the Lens now since 2021, and I'm so excited to start 2025's event series with you all. If this is the first webinar that you're joining, welcome. And if you've joined us before, welcome back, and thank you for supporting us. I'm genuinely thrilled to be here with two fantastic guests. Natalie Kane, the curator for digital design at the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and Siddhant Shah, the founder of Access for All, based in India. Today, we're going to dive into an important intersectional conversation, a topic around, it's not just a timely topic, but a vital topic to ensuring the future of arts and culture truly belongs to everyone. Today, my primary role is to guide us through the conversation, ensuring that everyone feels included, heard, and engaged. We want this space to be as welcoming as possible. So before we start, I'd like to provide a very brief visual description of myself for accessibility purposes. I'm a white cisgendered woman in her, let's say, mid-30s, wearing a grey wool jumper with long brown hair and a gold D pendant around my neck. We also have put into place some other access accommodations for today's session. Live captions are available and details of how to use these will be shared in the chat box. Our brilliant BSL interpreter, Andrea, is also shown on screen. And if you encounter any issues or need further support, please use the chat box and a member of our Tilting the Lens team will be on hand to help. Additionally, we encourage you to engage actively in the chat throughout the session. Feel free to share your thoughts, ask questions, or raise any technical concerns. For questions directed to our speakers, please use the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to address as many as them during the session. Before I hand over to our brilliant guests, I'll share a very brief personal story as to why this topic means so much to me. I've always loved visiting galleries and museums, much like I'm sure many of you, some treasured memories are walking around places like the Natural History Museum, the Science Museum, or finding random little exhibitions on little walks through London. But during my maternity leave, around about a year ago, I engaged with these spaces in a completely different way. As a woman who's disabled, living with a mental health condition, I found myself feeling quite low, quite isolated, and lonely during that time. And going to these spaces provided me a different outlook. Sometimes it was about taking a breath, sometimes it was about just looking at beautiful things, but it also formed a different bond between me and my daughter, who now loves going to galleries herself, and we regularly spend some weekends at the Young V&A in London. It made me realize how vital these spaces are for connection, healing, and personal growth. They allow people to pause, reflect, and gain perspectives. This experience really strengthened my commitment to ensuring that arts and culture spaces can truly belong to everyone and be enjoyed by everyone. Today's conversation will take a global and intersectional approach. Accessibility is not a conversation limited to Western contexts. It's a universal need that transcends borders and cultures. We're here to highlight perspectives from different parts of the world, showcasing how institutions in different regions can lead the way in creating truly inclusive experiences. Now, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our speakers. Natalie Kane brings her experience from the V&A, Victoria and Albert Museum, and her curation for digital design, where she explores the intersection of technology, art, and accessibility. Natalie is also the lead curator on a new exhibition that's coming to the V&A in South Kensington this summer, Design and Disability. Siddhant Shah is the founder for Access for All and is a trailblazer in India and globally, working tirelessly to make cultural and heritage spaces more inclusive and accessible. Both bring unique experience and wealth of knowledge to this conversation. So let's get started. Natalie, firstly, I'd love to ask you if you could share a little bit about your experience of disability and how this has shaped your role as a curator.
Sure, I'll do a quick visual description for everyone. So I'm a white non-binary person with a sort of brown, it's got a neater today than usual top knot, clear glasses and a black cardigan with a sort of blurred Zoom background. Occasionally a cat does wander in the background as well. So my experience is bloody. So I'm a curator who comes to design through the lens of sort of design and society. A lot of the focus of my kind of collecting work as a department is looking at the kind of social and political histories and interactions of sort of the built and design world. And obviously, as a disabled person, this kind of intersects in terms of thinking about like who's been historically erased and left out. And this has really come. It's hard to not ignore my own personal experience of this, because obviously the way that I interact with the world and the community that the many communities that I belong to kind of is part of that. And so my identity as a disabled person clashes so much with the factors that, like, obviously when I experience um, gallery spaces, but also just the design world in general, I really kind of invest in the ways in which the kind of creativity of disabled people and disabled perspectives comes into this. And I really kind of invest in that. And so it's really deeply kind of tied into my curatorial work. So the way that I've approached collections and the work as a curator has really moved me into thinking towards design justice, how design has ended up, how it has, whose perspective has not been acknowledged in the disability community, but also intersectionally and kind of globally. And in terms of exhibition making, I spend a lot of time sort of thinking about overstimulation and processing information. And it was actually interesting to your point, Emma, about rest, because for me, I it's always like who feels welcome in space and who doesn't. Like, God, like the amount of times I've been to exhibitions and the only bench you get is for a film that's like an hour long, and no one thinks about pace and like who do you really want to be in there. Like, I care so much about benches. I think I've probably chewed everyone's ear off about benches, because it's the expectations of what it means to be with culture and what we understand public space to be. Like, who, like we don't think about the idea of what it means to belong with other people in space, and sometimes you just want to be by yourself, and that's fine, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's nice to just be there. And this always leads about the idea of like productivity in general, and there's so much when it comes to like design in general with that. And I think that sometimes we want the kind of preservation of our cultural spaces and creative spaces to be as open as possible with that. And that's really developed a lot of my thinking, and that's kind of where I guess the point of the show has landed, and my own experience as sort of a disabled neurodivergent person. Anyway, that's a long answer to your question, but it got there
No,
in the
no, that's brilliant. And actually what you just highlighted, I think they're around that idea of rest and that idea of taking a breath. I've done that a few times in exhibitions for various reasons. Sometimes it's access and sometimes it's literally I just want to sit down for a minute and maybe do something on my phone. But then you can revisit a piece or revisit a section and see it in a whole different way if you're not rushing and not being made
Oh
to
yeah,
feel like you're rushing through. So I completely agree. It benefits everyone really.
yeah, 100%. I think we really have to think about like what what we want the experience of culture to be like. One of the pieces that really got me into like art and culture years and years ago was John F. Cardiff's 40-part motet, and it's a piece where you have loads of speakers in a room, and it's like different voices channeling like a choral piece, and that was in Brighton, like God, like maybe 15 years ago, and I was like an exhibition attendant there. And that was a piece that encouraged you to lie on the floor, spend as long as you wanted with it, and it was a real credit to that space and the people in it to not like rush you through it. And I think maybe that was the work that encouraged that to some degree. But like I love Fabrica in Brighton. Like, pro tip to anyone who goes to that space. But the idea of that space was had benches, it had open spaces. I think it had like bean bags and things. Though I do hate bean bags, we'll talk about that later. But the idea of like encouraging people to let their body do what it needed and what it wanted. I think we've lost sometimes a bit of that. The idea of like needing to rush people through at a certain pace and getting people through it a certain way. And yeah, I think it doesn't allow for what bodies need to do in public, I think.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that. And Siddhant, welcoming you from India. Thank you for joining us so late in the day. We really appreciate it. Um, a question that I'd really like to ask you is around the conversation around accessibility and inclusion, how it's evolving in India, particularly in arts and culture spaces, and thinking about, if there's not certain compliance laws, is it coming directly from organizations like yourselves?
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll just give a brief visual description about myself. Uh, I'm wearing a white t-shirt. I am 30 years old. I have spectacles, have a dusky skin, and I'm wearing a small badge right out of a Coldplay event, which we were working on the accessibility for. So it says love. Um, as you said, like I'll just put some things in perspective and then talk about then answer the question. Like, if you Google population of India, it shows 1 billion plus. It like it just shows like that plus sign tells you a lot, that a lot of it is undocumented. We had our last census in 2011, supposed to have one in 2021, but we could not have due to COVID. And what has transitioned between that and now is the fact that in 2016 there was a Rights for Person with Disability Act that was passed, and that increased the numbers of disability that were recognized by the government from 7 to 21. So now when you talk about all these different factors together, and then when we look at what is the scope and how is the landscape in this space evolving, I think it is changing, but it is slightly more fragmented. It does not have one holistic appeal and approach. Like, I have been working with some of the entities in UK, like with the British Museum, with the British Council. Even I had some time at the Tate where I had done a fellowship there. So just to look at and understand how it is seen as per the Equalities Act of 2010, everything comes under one umbrella. Here things are still fragmented, and it is only after 2016 that things have been made more inclusive and accessible. Like, there has been a change in which the government is trying to look at this as a space where it is growing. The identification of understanding the need of it is growing. And as I'm talking, I'm still talking about the basic existential things. I'm talking about the basic stuff that needs to be made more accessible, the infrastructure. And when you look at art and culture, it sadly comes towards the end. Like, let's see how to make it more inclusive and accessible. This is our 10th year. We entered our 10th year on 15th December last year. And to be in this space for last 10 years, pioneering in this area of, looking at art, culture, accessible, was a very conscious choice. It came from a personal experience because I'm a trained architect, and while I was in architecture, my mother acquired visual impairment, and we were in one of the galleries. And I come from a very typical Gujarati family where it's about business, and like you go for a family trip like once a year, and suddenly everything stopped for us. There was no form of recreation. There was no form of just being around things, and only thing that we were focusing on was how do we just make sure that she goes through by day things. And I think that was something that was one of the trigger. And I think the point that pushed me in the space of art and culture was because we were shooed out of an art gallery. Somebody, one of the curators in Mumbai, in that gallery, thought that my mother would touch something and that would, like, they were very uncomfortable with our presence, and they very politely shooed us out. And that really changed the perspective, and that really triggered me to understand that India is a world capital for visual impairment. And for somebody, for that particular group where touch is an important medium of learning something, understanding something, you're kind of just putting them behind the barrier and not being giving them access to it. And that is where the journey of Access for All started, in making art galleries and museums accessible with visual art. And now what we've grown into, working with different events, working with government, working with a lot of different corporate spaces. But that is where, for us, the journey started with art.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think a little bit later, we'd like to get back into where you're at today and the access around gigs, for instance, and how it's evolved. Natalie, we touched upon this briefly in the intros around design and disability, the new exhibition that's coming to the V&A in summer. Would you just share a bit about what it's aiming to communicate, and just a bit of an overview of what you can share, because obviously it's still very much under wraps, just to give the audience a bit of an idea?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I appreciate I can't do the full spiel because I've got my my press people saying things, but I could never give
Absolutely
you
not.
no, of course. But I want people excited because I'm really excited about it.
Yeah.
But it's really aiming to kind of prioritize disabled, deaf, and neurodiverse kind of cultural production, really, in all of its forms. So it's quite expanded in the way that we think about it in terms of sort of fashion and design and graphic design and built environment, and it really aims to be sort of a call to action and a celebration. And we're really trying to sort of veer away from sort of a lot of tropes of sort of inspiration, which is very much about saying sort of despite their disability, this person's able to design, because we really want to centre and honour like the specific design cultures that emerge from disabled perspectives, and what are the unique strategies of designs that are kind of emerging from disabled communities that have always been there really due to kind of narratives that have been sort of historically or systematically erased. And we really want to sort of see where sort of due to inaccessibility, design justices have existed, but people have pushed back and kind of broken or reanimated or reinvented design in really interesting ways. And obviously there are loads of really interesting political histories that exist in this, and it's not a historical show, it's very much a contemporary one in that sense, but we want to make sure that those political origins are represented in really interesting ways. There's so many interesting stories of people who've done like incredible work to get us where we are now. But there's like, we want to kind of pull out really interesting themes and conversations and methodologies and those kind of things. So we really want to kind of arrive at a place of sort of joy and power and I said reinvention. There's a quote that has really guided us through, which is by this incredible from this incredible work called the Crypt Techno Science Manifesto by Amy Hamrai and Kelly Fish, that it says that disabled people are the designers and experts of everyday life. And I really think that's such a fundamentally interesting, and for me, it's such a mantra in terms of like it's not like a sort of just set aside thing. It's so interwoven, like disabled perspectives on design are so interwoven in everything. We're just kind of bringing it to the surface, I think, hopefully in the show.
It's really exciting. And I think, like you said, those getting to see and experience those different perspectives, the political histories that people might not know and have access to before. It's really wonderful. Siddhant, to go back to you for a second. In terms of you touched upon the initiative, like with the British Council's projects and the art. I think there was an artist residency which happened in Cardiff and India. It would be interesting to just hear a bit more about how that reflects a growing commitment to accessibility in arts and culture. So having those two perspectives brought together. Can you tell us a bit more about that project?
Sure. So while we were working in this space, one of the things that we realized was the fact that the level of representation and also artists with diverse needs in India are largely seen as artists who would do like some craft projects or can make soaps and candle. But in order to elevate that, we've been working quite extensively with various different art festivals, art fairs in India to one, provide a platform for representation. And during COVID, we were looking at different projects that we could still continue having the relation that we had with our artists, to have a relation with the community that we were working with. And we were grateful for the grant that we received from British Council. It was a CTC grant, which was Connect Through Culture. And we had a partner in Cardiff, Johnny Cotson. He's a deaf performer. And together, both of us, we worked on putting together an artist residency program with 3 artists in India and 3 in UK that would meet for over a couple of months online, have various different have access to different workshops, sessions together, and then eventually they would work on our project, which was, and the residency was called Manifesto for Accessible Arts Festival, where together, along with the artists, along with the people in the industry, we put together a 10-point manifesto, which we wanted to share with the community in India. So there were points like simple things like normalizing non-participation, or looking at the importance of rest when we talk about how do we integrate, as Natalie was talking about that. And we had a similar idea that when somebody gives you a grant, it is seen that you are obliged to do more than like you could do. And when we were working with artists with diverse needs, we had to work around the flexibility of their time, the agility for them to be able to do it in the format that they were able to do it. It was a fantastic learning for us, because that was the first time in India ever a grant was put, the call out was put in an Indian sign language, a British sign language, There was an audio format. You could also share the grant in a. You could apply for it by sending just a simple Word doc. You could use any accessible format to use it. And we are very happy to see that now a lot of interesting grants in India are using that template, when they're working around persons with diverse needs. We recently saw a grant that was put out for, actually, by one of like organization like UNDP, that uses the format which is more inclusive, more accessible. So I think that grant became a catalyst for a change in India in different ways. Though in UK it was something that was accepted, that we've seen that in Unlimited and other grants where these formats were there. But for us in India, we had to adapt it to the needs of the thing. And also, secondly, this was one of the first grants where you could use your own Indian language that you was comfortable with you, and we would so. But all this was again possible because there was funding to do that. So I think funding has a very important role to play, and that is what we are constantly working on and trying to stay afloat. And when we are able to utilize and have these ideas, when we have that impetus and support which comes through funding.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's integral. I might have a follow-up question on how to find some of these artists or see some of their work, because yeah, having spoken to you before the webinar about this, it's such a fascinating and really brilliant project and initiative. Um, Natalie, just to talking about the design and disability exhibition and bringing that together, how important was that to bring in different perspectives into an advisory role when you were putting together? I know it's still obviously ongoing, but bringing together different disabled people as experts to help shape that exhibition. How important was that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I know that we're going to talk a bit later about the advisory group. We kind of had a two-stage advisory group for the process. I can talk about the design one. I'm
Perfect.
really,
yeah.
I'm really lucky that so we have had an internal design team within our V&A design team who designed the show. Who were Sam Brown, Angel, and Kirsten Applegard, who are 2D and 3D designers, and I can't credit enough how incredible their sort of research and taking on this task was. And they took on, following our initial advisory group, which I'll talk about later. They created their own advisory group. Obviously, we worked with them as well. But they contracted Disordering Architecture, who are a consultancy firm which are formed entirely of disabled kind of guest experts and kind of core experts, which is Zoe Parkinson and Josh Boys. And it was a really interesting process over, I think it was like 5 2-hour sessions, and it was really kind of testing the paces of the V&A. And like I really recommend them, and recommend actually anyone going through any sort of consultancy process where you do an access audit of your building or of your space. And the people who we worked with, which was Chris Lang, Helen Stratford, Abby Palmer, Natasha Trotman, and Mandy Rebus Rowe. By the way, the reason why I'm saying everyone's saying, so I really believe in giving credit to everyone who worked on everything. And they supported the development by essentially going through the V&A and just going, this is why it's a nightmare, or this is why it's great, or why it doesn't work. And I think that kind of transparency and that honesty helped us to kind of go, okay, this is what works and what doesn't. And I think there's definitely a process that you go through, and we went through, where it's like we were really clear on what we can and can't fix when you have like a 150-year-old building. And that was a really interesting process, I think, for us, in what we can change in the short term and the long term, and what we can do in an exhibition space and what we can do in a wider museum. I think that was a really interesting process. But the design team that we worked with we used things like prototype kind of cardboard tactile maps in order for us to map out the space. There were some really great spatial designs that happened, and it means that we've led to some really good decisions in the space. As I said, we can't talk too much about the exhibition design itself, but we can definitely talk about some things. So, for instance, things will be designed to deaf space principles, which is ensuring that sight lines and certain things have been kind of considered. There's also some really interesting ways to think about seating. So loads of seats, and not just for films, which is great. Because we really thought about rest, and we want people to feel really kind of relaxed across the show. I'm really excited by the process, and a lot of that has come because we've taken the time and made sure the priority in the budget was around that access and time and consideration. Yeah, and I really it's something that will benefit because that training has happened and will continue to happen. It will benefit future shows that we do, and I really want to emphasize that in terms of, I guess we'll come to this later, but what impact that kind of work does on the future exhibitions that you make, and for it not to just be seen as like a stopgap. Essentially, it's like, oh, we have to just do this because it's a show about disability. How do you expand that knowledge and build that knowledge within your team so that you can continue that work everywhere else? And I think that's really been the opportunity for this exhibition. And obviously, part of me is kind of going, it would be nice if it happened elsewhere, but actually, we're looking particularly for channeling disabled expertise within this show, and this has been a really great opportunity for us to do that. So
Yeah, I think this is so interesting as well, because the conversation around, the V&A is obviously a historic building. There's going to be certain limitations. You have to think about creative solutions. But also, we've seen a real trend in art spaces and cultural spaces that have included more information on their websites, for instance, around the accessibility, so that people can really plan their journey, understand, whether or not that's a space that they can engage with, and how best to do that. But and to your point around seating, I think there was an exhibition in was it the Brooklyn Museum a couple of months ago? It might still be going, and they had such a wonderful way of introducing more seating so that people could engage with different pieces at different sight lines, but also take a rest, take a break. So yeah, I think it's just a wonderful learning opportunity, and hopefully something that continues to stay with the museum. Siddhant, hello. I'm just going to encourage everyone in the chat and in everyone watching, if you have any questions, any Q&As, any thoughts, we're going to be getting to those in about 15 minutes. So please feel free to share them. You mentioned, you touched upon funding, and that the great need for funding when it comes to these initiatives, and obviously increasing budget constraints and accessibility and inclusion initiatives is something we're always facing. What innovative strategies can organizations and do you potentially use to make the most of limited resources, or make people really invest in this work?
I think that's a very interesting question, because it's like a creative challenge every day with every grant to understand, like, how to get them interested in what we want to do and align with their motive. Because a lot of grants that we get here in India come from a certain directive, in terms of where they have a certain preset notion and idea, and in order to work around that, then you have to be smart to craft your ask, which fits and aligns with their mission statement, their vision statement. So I think that is one way of looking at it. And other one, which we've learned over a period of time, like initially when we were starting, we would apply for any grant that would come our way. But now we have started to vet the grants and see whether that would be of use or no to us, because now we are also trying to look at the quality of the grants that we are working with, so that that exposes us to a certain kind of a network, certain kind of people, certain, like, I'm like, my interaction with Soho House was what got me introduced to you. So I think, like, those kind of channels, those kind of networks play a very important role. And they are not necessarily financial grants, but sometimes those networks can even put you in touch with the right group of people, which can help you to just leap from one point to another. Sometimes the grant is not always the money that comes in or the funding, but it's also the human resource that connects you to the right person at the right place at the right time. I think that is also an important learning that we have inculcated over a period of time.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually, the power of connection, and you don't know where the right people might align and meet. Like you say, we met through Soho House, and we had such an interesting conversation, and had it not been from that introduction, I wouldn't have known necessarily about Access for All and learned all about your wonderful work. So yeah, no, it's a great point.
We're to thank for that.
um Natalie, just thinking about not specific to the design and disability exhibition, but just in general in your history, in your background and experience. Are there examples where the effort to make an object or a concept accessible has led to a more creative and impactful way of sharing it with wider audiences? Is there anything that you can speak to specifically?
Oh, sorry, muted. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to mention this before, and we did. I think this the previous point that I didn't miss out. We did do a previous advisory group as well. I think I wanted to mention this
Oh,
quickly.
yes, yes.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Because we did have a previous stage before with like 11 people who advise in the curatorial process as well. Before that, I want to make sure I didn't miss those people out, because I think that's really important just to say that we did
Yeah,
do a consultancy process for that with 11 people who are amazing. Just to mention before.
brilliant. No, no, no. Thank
Um,
you. Thank you for
no, it's
sharing.
fine. But in terms of access, so in terms of the show, I can definitely say that we did some research in terms of what the idea of like materiality for us is really important, because we did quite a lot of research around sort of how 3D printing is. I know it sounds like a bit of a left field one, well, not left field, but like we can't share too much about what's going to be in the show, but we did a lot of work in terms of materiality and touch, and we were really keen to make sure we're not giving the second best thing to people in terms of disabled audiences within the show. And we wanted to make sure that as many, if not all, the tactile objects in the show are the actual thing rather than 3D printed objects, unless it's specifically kind of called for within the curatorial asks. So, for instance, if it's a 3D printed font, for instance, because material and sensory engagement is so important, and really led by like a lot of the work people like Georgina Klieger do in terms of ensuring that you have that it's obviously it's not just blind and low vision audiences, but for autistic and neurodivergent audiences that use material as a grounding technique, and we've laced that through the show as well in terms of its design, and so we want to make sure that people don't feel like only something that we want to continue throughout the exhibit, like the museum as well. I think that's something that we've been thinking quite a lot about, and there's definitely kind of programming and things about that we're trying to kind of extend. And in terms of objects in general, I mean, I'm a digital curator, digital design curator, so I think a lot about how we think beyond the objects. And I've seen someone mention about online access in general. Like, we live in a very digital network world, so the idea of thinking beyond the museum is one I'm constantly conscious of, and so it's just we're thinking about how we connect people beyond the exhibition, but also the fact is that we live in networks. There's some really interesting work in the show that speaks to that, and the idea that disabled people, particularly because of the models that we've shown throughout things like the beginning of the COVID to now and ongoing, the creativity that's sprung from that has constantly existed because of disabled people making community through design is on display in our show. And so we need to look to that as museums and understand that and see where we can learn from that. And so there's some methods that we're trying to figure out from that perspective.
Yeah, I love that idea and love to explore that more. And another point around like the online tours and things like that. I think it was on the Guggenheim website. They have some really wonderful audio described versions of artworks, and it's so it's just you get a real, I don't know, it's just a different way of enjoying it and understanding it, and you can sit in your home and feel safe and secure and not have to go out if you can't, and still experience the artwork and enjoy it.
But it's also just like the idea of seeing it as a creative like space. There's so many amazing artists like Bella Milroy and Finnegan Shannon doing incredible, like Finnegan, and I've completely forgotten the other artists that they work with, did alt text as poetry, which I consistently throw at my interpretation stuff. Anyone who interacts with me, which is the idea of seeing it as a poetic space. It's about like thinking beyond just literal description. Or Bella Milroy does incredible stuff around captions, which is great. And there's a great book called Crip Authorship, which I always lean to in the idea of like how you see access as a creative vessel for things. And obviously access is great, but it should be a space for like flourishing. In the show we talk about communal flourishing a bit, which is the idea of you go for access, and then more and more and more and more, and it's like, what do you see it beyond that space? And it's something that I found immensely rich in doing this show. It's like, how do we extend beyond that and ask for more? Like, we should always ask for more, because we always just get kind of the minimum, not the minimum, or was it minimum viable access? That's what I keep saying. But that's me being a cynical person sometimes. But I think that's the interesting thing about us centering on the design and seeing the creativity first, and seeing what's there, and what can we understand and see from a disabled led perspective. So
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think, you touched upon alt text as poetry there. And I think that may have been one of the key readings that our CEO shared with me when I joined the company, or just after I joined the company. And I saw her in the chat there, like, I love it. So we're all big fans of that as well, at Tilting the Lens. Siddhant, I'm just looking at time. Yeah, we've got time for a couple more questions before we go to the Q&A. You mentioned briefly when we connected before around a foundation that you launched around 18 months ago, I think, setting up inclusive libraries in India. How has that impacted the communities in terms of how that's really helping people, disabled people, and people come together?
So when we launched the library in India, the idea came from the concept of, like, a lot of times the funding, the grants that we get have been received in cities like Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, Bangalore. But what happens to smaller cities where there is no access to resources? And largely, like, in case when they have to look at things that would be required, people have to go all around, or, like, if some teachers are able to do that, they are keen to take that extra step, they would go to the closest metropolitan city and have access of those resources available. Looking at those challenges that they faced, we thought of working with existing schools and upgrading their libraries into resource centers. So what we do is, currently we identify two kinds of schools through our foundation, which is called Nirant. Nirant Foundation aims at updating and in value adding to the existing infrastructure that is there, in terms of making it more accessible for intellectual access, but also looking at the elements of social and physical access. So, to give you an example, if we find a school that works with the groups that are identified with intellectual disability, then we set up a resource center, we set up a sensory room, we provide various multisensorial elements, all in a box that could be opened up and utilized. So it is more like a treasure chest that opens up with different things inside them, in forms of various different resources. We also do go around conducting workshops, training the educators to use these resources that are integrated. And some of these resources are collected from different parts of our travel around the world. And then we try to integrate that in an Indian context in India. So, like, say, for example, like, there are these sensory sandbags and all that we saw. We actually tried creating them with similar food grains that we found, and in bags that we could use, which were safe, but were not as expensive as what were the resources that were available outside when that we found. So, like that, we try to integrate that, find ingenious resources and solutions to that. And similarly, like, if we find a blind school, we upgrade the school with various different things, like braille books, of course, audio guides, but also having tactile elements, like tactile learning aids, tools that they can use. So, say, for example, we've gone beyond just the textbook, but looking at things like creating books on menstrual hygiene for blind girls, looking at basics of banking for them. So, trying to understand and breaking these taboo based issues that are still prevalent in the country, but then trying to go beyond that and addressing it to the community through our foundation.
That's fantastic. And these are things that people need to learn. These are life lessons that people need to be equipped with when they're growing up. So making sure that that information is accessible to people who are blind and low vision is so important. I didn't realize that. That's so brilliant and interesting. I'm conscious of time. We probably have 2 more minutes before I have to go to the Q&A. One question I'd like to share with you both, and Natalie, I'll pass to you first. For young disabled people that are wishing to follow into a similar path of inclusive and accessible design, arts and culture, curation, is there any advice that you would give them?
This is a really hard question because
I'm sorry.
it's fine because I don't know how to answer it honestly.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
You can be honest.
Because it's like we live in a really difficult time for disabled people, I think.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
it's a very everyone it's such an individual question, and I think you need to like it's very hard for disabled people to ask honest questions of their institution. I think the first thing I'd find is if you're joining a cultural institute, a cultural organisation, is to find other disabled people that work there. But first of all, before you join, find out if there's like a disabled network. I think that's really helpful. And if you can find peers and then go and talk to them about the honest issues that and try and find community really quickly, I think that's really helpful, because often they will hold the knowledge of that institution. They will help you. That's what I usually find in terms of finding community quickly and honestly it always helps. And then it's holding your institution to account. I know these are like my honest answers, because I think it's really important for you to find out how to navigate this, because that's where you start to go, okay, how can I change this? But then how can I hold the institution to be like, this is the change that we should see. This is where the people are, and how we can make things work for us. Because I think that I don't know. We were going to talk earlier about like how you make funding this stuff sexy. I know it sounds awful to say this phrase, but it's like in terms of getting the budget for accessibility and getting the budget for this, it's making it like attractive as a goal and making all this stuff happen. But it's getting people in the places and showing that there are people here who want to make it happen. And often it is several people who are rolling that momentum and getting those people in positions where they can make that change happen. But those people need to feel supported and need to feel that they have everything there. And but for young disabled people who are there, it's like find community quickly, find spaces where you can talk about those problems, and then get that momentum. The other thing is to know that I should know that other people have done it before, and to find mentors and elders. Like find someone that you think is cool and write to them, because they've probably done that, or like writing the thing. No, they might not email back immediately because they're probably exhausted and tired. But know that like try and just say it, because they've probably done the same thing before. That's the other thing. I don't know. But I also know that I'm really bad communication, because I'm terrible at like messaging people back. But in my head, it's like maybe you need to find someone that you can just be like, this is really hard, and how do I do this? So this is a terrible answer.
That's not a terrible answer.
No.
That's an honest and true answer, and I think that's got you've really given some brilliant advice there. And had I not been hosting this webinar and listened to that, and as a younger disabled woman, I would have taken that advice. So I appreciate that feedback, and I hope that everyone else does too. Siddhant, same question for you, as brief as you'd like, given the time and the many Q&As.
I'll be very honest, like, like coming from a country like India that's on the cusp of development, we still like for a person with disability in India to work in art and culture, one does not pay that much. I'll be very honest, and I will be very honest about the fact that people who are working currently in the space are struggling to make like look at this as a focus thing. Unless you know the right people, unless you know the curator, unless you know somebody who's going to help you in the space, then it is okay. But if you are starting independently, like it I was a complete outsider in this space, and it has taken me 10 years to do what we do right now. And then comes the lens of gender, then comes the lens of the disability, then comes the lens of caste, various different things, which part of the country you're coming from. So the intersectionality really makes it a difficult space. And I will be very honest, and as brutal as it may sound, it is still a very elite space to be and working in. Without connections, you really struggle. I am seeing this one live example in front of me of a deaf artist. She is trying extensively to find a university in India, or now she's looking for a university in UK that would help her with the like basics of like studying conservation, but with Indian Sign Language in UK. And like, so just the challenge of figuring out the resources only like drains out so much out of you that it becomes as Natalie said, you really have to be at it. Like, you have to constantly try to be at it, and honestly, to be encouraged every day does get challenging. Like, for us also personally, like, it takes a toll on your mental health. It takes a toll on different aspects. Even if like, and then people see that, like, are you going to be able to support your family or not? So if one really wants to look at that, sadly, in India, we do two jobs to make sure that we can do our job in the space of art.
Yeah,
So
no, it makes
I honestly don't have an answer to what they could do, but yes, I can definitely say that, like, if you stick at it, like if you try to keep yourself afloat, of course it takes different ways of doing that. But if you stay afloat, like 10 years down the line, I have been able to now only focus on Access for All and not take up other odd jobs to just make sure that Access for All stays afloat.
Yeah, no, it's so true, and it's so difficult. There's a lot of work to be done, but making people
I'll give
aware of
you a very small
organization like
example. Sorry, I'm. Can I
no,
give a
carry on.
small example?
Of
Like,
course.
while we were doing this, while we were running the residency, we had partners in UK. The artists in UK had support from the government in terms of having a sign language interpreter, having a scribe writer, and other things. And in India, we had to pay for all these facilities, and that went out from the grant money. So
Yeah,
now that just puts in perspective that, of course, we are going, like, we are growing a day at a time, but it's still like very
yeah,
different when we answer the question on the two sides of the. And working in UK, working in India, I do feel that.
yeah. And this is why these conversations are so important, to get that different perspective of how things are evolving in different parts of the world. So yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go to a couple of the Q&A questions because they are really filling up my inbox. So let's have a look here. A question for Natalie. Sorry. Considering your remit for digital as well as this exhibition, are the museum considering using digital tools such as Welcome Me for the customer experience?
I've not heard of Welcome Me, but in terms of digital tools, it's not. I mean, it's not really my remit in terms of kind of conducting specific kind of things. But in terms of I can talk a bit more about the kind of online side of things.
That would actually be great, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, as I mentioned beforehand, we want to make sure that we do have some of that consideration, because obviously we want to make sure we think about this. And I can't confirm everything that we're doing because, as I said, it's a really live conversation for us right now. But it's something that when we spoke to our advisory group, obviously many of whom experience culture at home, and there's a really great blog. I mean, I really encourage you to read the White Pube blog post about culture at home. It's really good. It's a series about it, actually. And we're trying to think about options for this at the moment and how we experience it, because obviously we know that V&A, for instance, our like YouTube channel is like wildly watched for like all of these kind of like in-depth things about it, and we want to try and see what we can do. But I would love to do things like obviously online curator tools, which are a bit more a bit longer and more in depth. Obviously we have budgets, and it's some things that we have. I talked quite a bit about prioritization. There are things that I'm looking to prioritize which benefit certain things, and we are leaning on what disabled people want. So this is where I would be interested, if anyone out there has a particular thing that they want, just let us know on social media and that kind of thing. We like, it's something that we want to hear from disabled people about. So yeah, we give, like, public pressure is always really useful. So but we're planning. We are in planning. I can't confirm everything, but we are planning. So
Thank you. Question for Siddhant. Sorry. What gives you joy through your disabled imagination in your design work? What gives you joy through your design work?
Wow, okay. uh, I think the fact that people feel that art and art spaces are for them too, that feeling that they face when they come to the museum, when we have been able to make the space more inclusive and accessible through design, I think that moment is quite joyful. Being able to give people the confidence that the museum also belongs to them. They are an equal stakeholder of the same, and not only just someone's charity case or someone's CSR case or someone's social media event person that they're just coming in to fill it in. But when they come on their own, when they come, like, I for me, it reminds me of this one situation where we had we had designed a gallery, and this was the first time that the father had a severe neck down disability, and he was able to bring his daughter for the first time to the gallery and take her around on a tour because his wheelchair could go through the exhibition. And that was something that and we didn't know that happened. They came in and we only got to know when we read the feedback book that he was able to do that. So I think when you're able to enable people with the dignity of choice for them to do it on their
Yeah,
own and do that through design, I think that gives us joy.
brilliant. To build on that question, Siddhant, just it would be great to hear from you. Are there any projects that you can talk to or speak to that are happening in India at the moment that you're supporting that you'd like people to know about? For instance, you briefly mentioned Coldplay.
we we work with different organizations on assisting them to be more inclusive and accessible, like different events that are there. So like there is India Art Fair that happens in February, which we are working with in terms of making it more inclusive, accessible. We have set up inclusion labs inside an art fair where people with diverse needs can come. Also, it's a space for people to come and engage in inclusive workshops, which are not for like that you have to come up with an outcome, but they're more process driven, where everyone can take their own pace, create art, and then take a space to decompress, take a pause space. We create tactile artworks in the space. We love putting the signage that says please touch, because most of the art spaces have the sign that says please do not touch. And we get a lot of people who come and tell us that, oh my god, you've made a mistake, it should have been please do not touch. And then just to break that notional barrier that yes, you can touch, feel, experience artwork in a space like that. We have been working with different corporate CSR projects. We have a couple of donors from Zurich who have supported us in setting up these public libraries that we are creating in an accessible format. So these are different kinds of projects that we keep on doing, and along with that, we do work with various different kinds of corporates that help us. Largely because now corporates in India also have to follow standards that they have in their home country. So that way, we are initiating and working in the space of DEI, and currently ongoing project that has been is also Soho House, and working as their inclusivity board member, and to learn from different partners around the world and to integrate that in Indian subcontinent has been a great learning. So I think these are the things that we've been doing. And along with that, I also teach, and I teach largely in the space of design and disability, and also help set up curriculums around that in various different design colleges.
Brilliant. You're busy. Um, and joining us at like 11 p.m. in the evening. So we really appreciate it. We've got time for one more question. So Natalie, in terms of design and disability, what does success look like for you even before it opens? Sorry, big question.
Good question. I hope that disabled people have a nice time. I think that's a really key thing for me, is that disabled people, obviously we can't, within our sort of small team, we can't claim to do everything we know that sort of disabled people We can't represent everyone, and we know we won't do that. There's no way we can. People aren't a monolith. But we hope that we go somewhere to sort of starting a conversation. There's many people who've done great stuff before us, but we want to continue that sort of trajectory, and it for be the kind of it's somewhere on the journey to up people doing more work in this space. And I want it to be somewhere on the way to more people doing more things. That's a terrible answer, but I think for us, it's just people feeling seen and wanting to continue the good work. I guess we're part of an ongoing history that will continue to be bigger and better. I don't know.
Brilliant. No, we're so thrilled to be able to speak about it, and we can't wait for it to open. So unfortunately, we're now almost out of time. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone for joining us today and for being part of this really interesting conversation. Massive thanks to our amazing speakers, Natalie and Siddhant, for sharing your expertise and experience. You're truly creating a really inclusive arts and culture space globally. And it's so exciting to hear about the projects that you've got ongoing. For those who'd like to stay connected with Natalie and Siddhant's work, we are sharing links in the chat box now, so be sure to check them out. I'd also encourage everyone that was part of this conversation today, listening, to think about what stood out, what you can bring back to your teams, your organizations, or your own creative practices to ensure that inclusion and accessibility are at the front and center. For everyone who asked questions, thank you so much for your curiosity and your engagement. If we didn't get to your question today, don't worry. We're going to be sharing some more Q&A answers on the Tilting the Lens website in the coming days. The recording of today's session will also be available on our website, as will the transcript. And I just want to say a massive thank you to my colleagues at Tilting the Lens for all your behind the scenes work, making this session as smooth and accessible as possible. And thank you to Andrea, our brilliant BSL interpreter, who has kept up with some of my very fast speaking in parts, so I apologize. Thank you everyone for your time, your energy, and your commitment to these vital conversations. We look forward to more collaborations and progress in creating art and culture spaces that welcome everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you are in the world, and hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.